Hello, and welcome to the Temple of Justice. I'm Washington State Supreme Court Justice Charles Wiggins, and I'm delighted to have you join us on a tour of the Temple of Justice. Joining me today is retired Justice Gerry Alexander, the longest-serving Chief Justice of the Washington State Supreme Court in state history. Justice Alexander has agreed to come with us and to discuss some of the historical features and the architectural details of the court, as well as take you behind the scenes for the inner workings of the court. Justice Alexander, perhaps we could start with a discussion of the architects of the building and the construction of the building.
I'd be happy to do that. The architecture firm that was retained to design this wonderful building was a little-known architecture firm in New York City, Wilder and White. Wilder and White had actually won a competition to design what is called a capital group of 6 buildings. 5 of the buildings were built, and happily for the Supreme Court, the first of the buildings that was built was the Temple of Justice. The legislature appropriated a sufficient amount of money to allow the building to be occupied in sort of an incomplete form, and the court did move into the building in early 1913. The legislature in succeeding years appropriated money to allow the building to be completed in the grand form that we see today, and that completion was about 1920. It's a wonderful building, and I'm delighted that it's survived so well for 100 years.
The Temple of Justice houses both the Supreme Court and the Washington State Law Library. Let's go inside and start the tour.
Sure.
Well, here we are in the foyer. This beautiful room introduces the visitor to what I think is the majesty of the law when you come in here and you see this impressive facade, and yet it's a comfortable place as well. To this side is the courtroom of the Supreme Court, where we hear our arguments. Over to my left is the office or the chambers of the Chief Justice, and then directly in front of us is the Law Library, which we'll visit in a few minutes. Justice Alexander, could you tell us a little about the materials that were used here and some other features of the foyer?
I'd be happy to. I really love this entrance foyer, and as you point out, it's a grand entrance to this wonderful building. The walls are clad in marble. It's marble that comes from Alaska. I'm told that large chunks of it were brought down in ships that were in the Alaska trade, and you'll see this type of marble in a lot of older office buildings in this region. The foyer area and the adjacent hallway also contain a number of display cabinets and displays that depict the legal history of this state, so that when visitors come here they can learn a little bit more about the history of the justice system in the state of Washington.
Great. Well, let's move on to the Chief Justice's reception room and hear a little about that, shall we?
Fine.
Well, here we are in the Chief Justice's reception room. Justice Alexander, could you tell us a little about how this room is used?
I'd be happy to. As you indicated, it's the Chief Justice's reception room, and it is used for receptions following a ceremonial swearing in of new attorneys or new justices to the court, other functions throughout the year. Historically, the room was used as a small or minor courtroom. It was actually designated for that purpose by the architects when the building was constructed, but in recent decades the court hasn't felt the necessity of having 2 courtrooms, so it's no longer used as a courtroom but is used for receptions and meetings, and it's really a wonderful room, one of my favorites in the building.
Mm-hmm. Who are the gentlemen in the paintings here on the wall?
Well, because it's the Chief Justice's reception room, we have portraits of the first 2 Chief Justices of the state of Washington. On my left is a portrait of Justice Anders, or Chief Justice Anders, who served as the state's Chief Justice from 1889 to 1891. And then on my right is a portrait of Chief Justice Dunbar, who served from 1891 to 1893. I think it's very appropriate that our first 2 Chief Justices should be smiling, or not really smiling, I guess, but looking on this room and all the activities that take place here.
One of my favorite things about Justice Dunbar is his name was Ralph Oregon Dunbar, because he was born on the Oregon Trail. So that's how far back that goes. Yep. Speaking of other old things, what about these books here?
Well, the state Supreme Court has a really significant collection of antiquarian law books, and this is a portion of that collection, not the entire collection, but they're behind lock and key there in those cabinets are some books that are 400 or 500 years old, and we're very proud of that collection.
Well, let's take a look at some more books. Shall we head over to the State Law Library?
Good idea.
Great. Here we are in the State Law Library. This is one of the largest law libraries west of the Mississippi, with 350,000 volumes. If you had come into this room 100 years ago, it would have looked very much like it does today. And I can tell you, as you've experienced as a justice, this is a treasure trove, because we research the law, we send our law clerks down here, and we rely on this facility. But I think it's interesting, who else uses the law library in addition to the members of the court?
Well, it's used by a lot of people. It's used by members of the legislature, their staff, lawyers in the office of our Attorney General, other lawyers who work for a variety of state agencies, and importantly, it's open to the public 9 hours a day. And so if an individual has a legal problem, maybe they have a traffic ticket in one of our communities, they can come in here and they can look up the law. We have skilled people working in the law library who can't practice law for them, but they can help them find the law on their own. And I think that's very important in our society, that people have access to the law that applies to them.
I think that's one of the great things about this law library. Another great thing are these older volumes. What is this?
Well, there's 4 of these old antique lawyer bookcases, and they contain what we've been able to find are the remnants of the original territorial law library, which was acquired almost as soon as we became a federal territory in 1853. Our first territorial governor, Isaac Stevens, ordered law books to be brought around the Horn by ship to this new territory of Washington, and we've been able to discover that we still have these portions of that original law library, and so we're very proud of that.
One of the features I like about the law library is these gorgeous chandeliers that match the chandeliers in the Supreme courtroom and have symbols of justice, like the flaming sword, the scales of justice, the wheel of retribution, and a number of other symbols, the Roman fasces and the axe, all of these ancient symbols of justice, and really reminders of the important work that goes on here. Let's head on over to the courtroom, take a look at that.
A good idea.
Well, this is the courtroom. I think of this as the public face of the court, because this is where our public proceeding takes place. I argued many times here, as you know,
yes,
before the court, before I became a justice, and what the lawyers do when they come in to start an argument is the first stop is over to the bailiff's desk, where they tell the bailiff how they're going to use their time. Only 20 minutes per side, so it's a pretty compressed thing. And then they sit at the 2 tables, one side takes each table, and then they come up and argue from the podium right here. So the justices are all pretty close, and you're up front and personal with the judges when you're arguing here. There's a system of lights so that you have a 5-minute warning when your time's about to expire, and then a red light when it's time to stop. And then you wait before the argument for the bailiff to strike the gavel and bring in the judges. How does that happen? Maybe we can go up behind the bench and talk a little about that.
Sure. The bailiff knows that the justices are ready to mount the bench. The bailiff sits over there, but in the conference room of the court, there's a buzzer on the wall, and when the justices are lined up in the hallway, which is just on the other side of that door, when they are lined up and ready to go, the Chief Justice presses the button, and a light goes on the desk of the bailiff. The bailiff knows then to start striking the gavel, and with that, the justices enter the room in reverse order of seniority. The junior justice opens the door and comes in first, and the Chief Justice comes in last and occupies this chair. And when the Chief Justice sits down, the other justices sit down as well.
So does each justice have an assigned seat?
Yes. They sit on the bench in order of seniority. The Chief Justice is seated in the center in this larger chair, and on her right is the most senior justice on the court. To the left, the next most senior, and then back and forth with the most junior justice on the court seated to my left.
Since the mid-1990s, TVW has broadcast and filmed all of the oral arguments here. So if anyone wants to see how it works on the Supreme Court, they can go on the internet to www.tvw.org, and they can watch any argument that's been argued in the last 15 years or so. I think that's quite a resource.
I'm very proud of the fact that the Washington Supreme Court was the first Supreme Court of any of the 50 states to have all of its hearings televised on the public channel, gavel to gavel. We started that shortly after I came to the court in 1995, and we've maintained that tradition of having all of our hearings televised, and I'm very proud of that fact. Since then, other states have followed suit, but we were the first to do that.
Well, now that we've talked about the courtroom a little bit, let's go back and see where the justices actually decide the cases, shall we?
Let's do it.
This is the Justices' conference room. We come in here immediately after the argument, and we decide the case that day. Now, what was interesting to me coming on the court was that all the justices sit in the same order of seniority in here that they sit in on the bench. Everything is done in that order of seniority. Justice Alexander, would you describe how the process of conferencing the case works?
Well, it's the process makes a lot of sense. Before argument, one of the justices is designated as a reporting justice, and as you've indicated, we begin conferencing the cases immediately after we come off the bench, and the Chief Justice will call on the reporting justice to briefly summarize the facts, the issues, and that justice's analysis of the issues, and then the reporting justice will make a recommendation, and then the Chief Justice will allow questioning of the reporting justice. When that's completed, the Chief Justice will ask, is there a dissenting view? And then if there is a justice on the court who disagrees, that justice may then present his or her views. When that is done, then the justices may question the dissenting justice. Finally, when all of this peters out, the Chief Justice will call for a vote, and our order of voting changes with each case. Always start the voting with the justice who sits to the right of the reporting justice, and then go around the table, with the Chief Justice always voting last. The Chief Justice keeps track of the votes, and if the reporting justice receives a majority of the votes of the members of the court, that justice will be assigned the responsibility to write the majority opinion, and the first person to speak in dissent will write the dissent. This is all tentative because until people actually sign on the opinions, perhaps a few weeks later, votes can change and reassignments sometimes have to be made.
I noticed there's a flag hanging on the wall down here, an American flag with 12 stars. What's the significance of that?
Well, it looks like a very old flag. It's actually a replica of what they call the Constitution flag. It was presented to the court a number of years ago by the American Trial Lawyers Association. I think they presented one to each Supreme Court in all of the 50 states. And it is a replica of the flag that flew over the swearing-in ceremony of our first president, George Washington, who was sworn in actually in New York City. And the reason there are 12 stripes, 12 stars and 13 stripes, when the Constitution was adopted in 1787, it indicated that as soon as 9 states ratified, the Constitution would go into effect. By 1789, only 12 states had ratified, so that's why there could only be 12 stars. Happily, the 13th state did ratify shortly thereafter, and of course we now have 50 stars on our flag.
So the next step after the conference, as Justice Alexander said, is for the assigned judge to write the opinion. Those opinions are circulated. There's a little bit of back and forth among the judges, changes made to the opinion. And then, once everyone has signed off on either the opinion, the majority opinion, or perhaps a dissenting opinion, the opinions go down to the reporter's office, who finalizes the opinion, and then they're issued. Let's step into the clerk's office and take a look at the spindle where the opinions are actually filed.
All right. Well, Justice Wiggins, I think it might be a good idea to tell our viewers a little bit about what items are on this podium before us. It contains 2 spindles. This spindle, as you know, contains the decisions of the court in cases on which the court has heard argument. The court files its opinion on those cases that are ready to be have the opinion filed on Thursdays. And so if we look here, we'll see a decision that was filed on October 18th. That's last Thursday. Since we're filming on a Wednesday, more opinions will be filed tomorrow. And so that's what's on this spindle. On this spindle, these are orders of the court, but relate more to the court's administrative functions, one of which, one of the court's responsibilities is to be the last word on the issue of admission of lawyers to the practice in Washington and the discipline of lawyers who are currently practicing in our state. And so a lot of the orders here relate to admission and discipline matters and other administrative functions of the court.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, these days, of course, all of these decisions are put up on the internet on Thursday morning, and every lawyer who has a case pending is checking that internet on first thing on Thursday morning to see if they've won or lost. And anyone, of course, can go online and go to www.courts.wa.gov and can find all of our opinions for the last 90 days. They drop off after 90 days, but it's really the modern way of checking the spindle, I think.
And that's been a great advancement for people being informed about the work of their court. But in some ways, I lament the old days. I remember when on filing day, the clerk's office would spread the copies of the opinions that had been filed that day on this counter, which is right in front of us, and members of the press would come over, go through those to see what had happened. Lawyers, and you remember this, used to be called on the day the opinions came out and told very briefly by somebody in the clerk's office, you won or you lost, or words to that effect. And you had to wait a couple of days until you got the opinion in the United States mail to find out exactly the reasoning of the court. Now, the attorney or anyone who's interested in the case can immediately access the opinion the minute it's filed and knows what the court did. So we don't really get the big group of visitors coming over here on filing day like we did in the past.
I should say a few other words about the clerk's office itself, because this is the office that really handles all of the paperwork for the court, and they handle mountains of paperwork. Very fine office, very fine employees who've been with us a long time and have given a lot of years of service to the state. So this is a great office, and we have wonderful staff here, as we do throughout the temple. I think it's of interest, too, that on the wall behind us are photographs and portraits of all of the justices who have served on the Washington State Supreme Court, and on the opposite wall are the justices who served on the territorial Supreme Court. And with that, let's walk down through the gallery and go back out to the foyer. Well, Justice Alexander, thank you so much for explaining the history of the temple and so many things that have happened here and the processes that we go through. It's been a real treat to have you back.
Well, it was a great pleasure for me to participate.
Thank you. And thank you to our audience for your interest in the Supreme Court. Now that you've visited us through the internet, perhaps you'd like to visit us in person, where we hold arguments on Tuesdays and Thursdays when we are in session, and you can easily find out our schedule by checking www.courts.wa.gov. And we'd love to have you come. The courtroom is open to anyone. That's one of the things in our Constitution, is we have open courts. We're here to continue the tradition, the fine tradition in this building of dispensing justice for the last 100 years and for the next 100 years. Justice yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Thanks so much.
Well, I think we did pretty well as actors, don't you?
I think it's been a fine time.
I think
but you have lots of practice up there on the bench.
Well, so I think Hollywood is going to be calling soon.
That's our next destination.
Our next destination.
Let's go to Hollywood next.